The rain had just stopped, but the streets were still wet, glistening under the pale afternoon light. Cars splashed through puddles, rushing past as if no one else existed, while people hurried along the sidewalks, umbrellas tucked under their arms. In the middle of all this movement, there was a woman, her shoulders bent, her steps uneven, her arms straining under the weight of two heavy grocery bags that seemed far too much for her small frame. Each step looked like a battle, every breath like it cost her strength she didn't have. Her hair was damp, sticking to her cheeks, and her eyes kept darting to the ground as though she was willing herself not to fall. To anyone who noticed, she was just another tired face in the crowd, but to the universe, she was carrying more than just those bags. She was carrying years of struggle, pain, and loneliness, and she was carrying it alone. Before I go deeper into this story, I want to pause and ask you something. If you believe that kindness still matters, that second chances can change a life, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, I Am Kindness Corner. By doing so, you help spread stories of compassion, hope, and humanity, the kind of stories the world desperately needs more of. The woman's name was Amina. She had lived in the city for only a few months, having left her small town after her husband walked out, leaving her with nothing but debts and a broken heart. She had come to the city with hopes of finding work, of building a new life for herself. But life in the city was unforgiving. She worked long hours at a small sewing shop where the pay was barely enough for rent and food. Even so, she never complained, because complaining didn't fill an empty stomach or keep the lights on. Today, she had used what little she had earned that week to buy groceries. Bread, rice, lentils, and a few vegetables. Nothing fancy, just the basics, but to her, these bags represented survival. Yet as she walked the long road back to her apartment, the weight of the food seemed to press down on her chest as much as her arms. Her building was nearly 2 kilometers away, and there was no money left for a rickshaw. With every step, the handles of the bags cut deeper into her palms, leaving angry red marks. She shifted them from hand to hand, pausing occasionally to set them down, but the cycle repeated: lift, stumble forward, drop, and lift again. She glanced at the passing people, secretly hoping someone might notice her struggle, but no one did. Some were too busy, some looked away, and some simply didn't care. That was when it happened. From the corner of her eye, she saw a small figure running toward her. At first, she thought it might be another passerby hurrying past, but no, this boy stopped right in front of her. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His clothes were worn, his shoes slightly torn, and his hair was messy, but his eyes shone with something pure. Without hesitation, without waiting for permission, the boy stretched out his small hands and reached for one of her bags. At first, Amina tried to protest. She shook her head, her pride pushing against the offer. How could she let a child carry what she herself was barely able to manage? But before she could find the words, the boy smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone offering charity, it was the smile of someone who simply wanted to help. And that simple, unspoken kindness disarmed her defenses. Reluctantly, she allowed him to take one of the bags. To her surprise, he lifted it with surprising strength, balancing it against his thin body as though he had done this many times before. They began to walk side by side. For the first time in hours, her body felt a little lighter, not only because half the weight was gone, but because something heavy inside her heart had shifted too. She glanced at the boy, wanting to ask who he was, why he was helping, but she stayed quiet. Somehow, silence seemed more fitting, as if speaking would shatter the fragile moment. The road stretched on, but it felt different now. The boy walked cheerfully, even humming a small tune as they moved along. He didn't seem to notice the stares of people passing by, nor did he care that his clothes were damp and his shoes soaked from the puddles. For him, this was not a burden, it was simply an act of kindness, something natural. And Amina couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something for her without asking for anything in return. As they reached closer to her building, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the day her husband had left, how he had packed his bag and walked out the door without even looking back. She remembered the shame of returning to her family's house, of neighbors whispering behind her back, of the judgment in people's eyes. She remembered the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wishing someone would just sit beside her and say, "You're not alone." But no one ever had. And now, here was this little boy, a stranger with nothing to give except his time and strength, doing exactly that, reminding her that she wasn't as invisible as she thought. By the time they reached the entrance of her building, her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. The boy carefully placed the bag down by the door, his small arms shaking slightly from the effort, though he never once complained. Amina fumbled for words, her throat tightening. She wanted to thank him, to offer him something, anything, but she had nothing to give. Not money, not food, not even a gift. She simply whispered her gratitude, her voice breaking, "Thank you, Beta." The boy looked at her with a simple nod, his smile never fading. Then, without asking for anything, without waiting for recognition, he turned and ran off into the busy street, vanishing into the crowd. That night, as Amina unpacked the groceries, she found herself staring at the bag he had carried. It was heavier than the other, packed with rice and oil, things no child should have had to lift. She imagined his thin arms straining, his little feet splashing through puddles, and her heart ached. But along with the ache came something else, hope. If a boy with so little could give so much, then maybe the world wasn't as cold as it seemed. Maybe kindness was still alive, hidden in unexpected places. Days turned into weeks, and though she never saw the boy again, his memory stayed with her. Every time she picked up her sewing needle at work, every time she passed the street where he had appeared, she thought of him. Slowly, she began to carry herself differently. She smiled at strangers, greeted neighbors she had once avoided, and even began helping an elderly woman in her building with her laundry. Kindness had been planted in her heart like a seed, and it was growing. Her life didn't transform overnight, struggles still came, bills still piled up, and work was still hard. But inside, something had shifted. The loneliness didn't feel so crushing anymore. The shame didn't sting as much. And whenever she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her again, she remembered the small boy who had shared her burden that day, reminding her that even the smallest hands can lift the heaviest weights when guided by kindness. If this story has touched your heart even a little, I humbly ask you, please like, share, and subscribe to I Am Kindness Corner. By doing so, you're not just supporting this channel, you're helping us spread stories that remind the world of the power of compassion. Your simple action can carry someone's burden, just like that little boy carried hers. And before we end, I have a special request. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness from a stranger? Share your story, I would love to read it, and together, we can create a corner of the internet filled with hope and humanity. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single act of kindness, a bag carried, a smile given, a hand held, to change someone's life forever. And that is the kind of world worth believing in.